everybody. Forgive me, I'm so sorry. And thank you very much for joining us this evening. We would like to acknowledge the Wurundjeri and Woiwurrung and Yalukit Weelam and Bunurong as the traditional custodians of the lands on which Pavilion is situated and this event is hosted. We also acknowledge the traditional custodians of the various lands on which you might be listening back to this recording. We pay our respects to elders past and present and celebrate the diversity of Aboriginal peoples and their ongoing cultures and connections to the lands and waters of Victoria and across Australia.
Well, hello and welcome to the final in the surrounding series for Pavilion. My name is Lauren Taylor. This is Simon Winkler. We present a radio show on Triple R every week called Breaking and Entering. We've also been presenting a monthly series called Surroundings for Pavilion, which looks at the monthly Pavilion themes featuring a range of guests across an array of creative disciplines. And this month's theme for March is Space Experiments in Time. And tonight we're going to be speaking with artists and curators who make this city their workshop, their lab and playground, to talk about experimenting in public, making more space for art outside of galleries and finding the new frontiers for what a festival can be and achieve. Most of us, I guess, have some experience of artworks in public, from White Night to highway art installations to spoon villages and chalk drawings that emerged along pathways during COVID. But today we're speaking to a panel who are committed to exploring the potential for public art in a variety of ways. Some of the core questions we're going to be discussing this evening are: what are the challenges around creating art in public space? For example, selecting the appropriate artist for the space. How do you overcome bureaucratic hurdles? What do you think makes an effective public artwork? What kinds of response should it ideally offer, provoke, and inspire? How do you bring the community into the process? Why are public artworks important, and what do they offer in terms of scale, accessibility, and impact? Tonight we're joined by an amazing panel of guests who we might get to introduce themselves, maybe starting with you, Jessie.
Hello, can everyone hear me? Is my mic on? Yep, beautiful. My name's Jessie French, and I have worked in kind of public art for more than a decade now. I started off setting up the Pavilion, and I ran the program for the first 4 years. And then I went on to consulting for a private company that works with the City of Melbourne and lots of other local councils, as well as developers around the city. And on that, I did a lot of work on the Metro Tunnel project. They have 5 kilometres of signage with giant hoardings around the city. And the idea with those was to minimise the disruption and make things look good while that's happening. More recently, I have started making my own work. I make bioplastic out of algae, and most recently, a couple of weeks ago, I took a lease out on a space 2 blocks down the road, which is going to be a public space for the next 6 months at least.
And Kimberley?
Hear me? Yep. My name's Kimberley Moulton. I'm a Yorta woman. My people are from northeast of Victoria. I'm Senior Curator for Southeastern Aboriginal Collections at Museums Victoria, and also Artistic Associate for Rising Festival Melbourne. I have a practice that kind of looks at the intersection, I suppose, of contemporary First Nations art and the archive and historical material. So I sort of have one foot in both camps. And yeah, I've been at the museum for a while. I was at Bunjalaka Aboriginal Cultural Centre before my senior curatorial role there, working in Birrung Gallery, which is the community art space. And I was curator of that gallery for about 8 years as well. So that's me.
Hi, everyone. My name's Glen. I'm originally a theatre maker, a musician, did stupid comedy shows for about 10 years, and then I also work for a company called Polyglot Theatre, making large outdoor installations for children. And since 2015, I've been working, building a little company called Playable Streets, And our focus is on creative, interactive, musical and art installations of some kind to encourage public collaboration and play in public spaces. And one of my big focuses is on communication between people in public spaces and how we can encourage that, especially touch in public spaces, which obviously is a little bit problematic at the moment. But yeah, still chipping away.
Hi everyone. I'm Steph Hughes, and I've mainly for the last 10 years been a local illustrator, doing a lot of commercial jobs and my own work. I do a lot of kind of map work and stuff like that, but also a local musician, so have been playing a lot around Melbourne for years and years. In 2020 and around 2019 actually, so just before everything kind of shut itself, I was kind of thinking of a couple of ways to be involved in community art and get a couple of ideas I had in mind, get them off the ground, and coincided with Moulton Council actually starting to kind of approach me on things. So I was doing some murals of my own work with Moreland and Moonee Valley Council, and it's turned into kind of getting to work with a lot of young people, primary schools, and older people lately in creating murals collaboratively. So yeah, it's an idea that's kind of been, we've worked on a lot in 2020 and hopefully continue to do it. The most recent collaborations I've been doing are with Playable Streets with Glen. So yeah, we've been working on something lately that's basically inventing or building instruments that kids have invented. And so yeah, that's something that's going to be happening in 2021.
Amazing. Well, thank you so much, everybody, for introducing yourselves and giving such a wealth of knowledge and depth of the various fascinating projects that you're working on. We're going to, as Lauren mentioned, get to some general questions to address to all of you, but we might start individually and then draw the discussion to become more general a bit later on. And Kimberley, perhaps if we could start with you. In this panel, soundtracked by the city of Melbourne around us, we're exploring the different ways to engage audiences and to introduce important conversations around art in public. And among your many roles, you are currently working as the Artistic Associate at Rising Festival. To begin with, could you tell us a little bit more about what this role entails?
Sure. So I started with Rising last year, which was amazing, but also quite strange because I, started a new job in my lounge room, as some of us did. But yeah, working with the Rising team, they're amazing. So Rising, for those of you that may not know, is Melbourne International Arts Festival and White Night that's been reimagined. And so Rising will be taking place the 26th of May this year in Melbourne. And I guess I've come on and I'm working very closely with Hannah Fox and Gideon Oberzanik, who are the artistic directors, and leading a couple of projects that are First Nations focused, but also kind of advising and working with my other colleagues at Rising on a number of their projects as well. This year I've curated the Melbourne Art Trams with Rising and our partners as well, and this is the first time that they've done a First Nations art tram cohort, so that's been really exciting to work with artists. We put a call out, we got nearly 60 applications in, which is huge considering, I kind of did an audit over the last decades that the art trams have been going, and it's had different iterations since 1978. And in the 100 or so trams, there's been about 11 Aboriginal artists, 4 Aboriginal women. So I was really interested in kind of representation with this project. But yeah, we put a call out to First Nations artists living in Victoria, and also really wanted to reach the regions, and got incredible applications back. And so we have some 6 amazing artists they've been announced. But so that's just one of the projects that I'm working on. And then I'm leading another project called Moving Objects, which is something that I've created out of many years of working within the museum and having access to our ancestral belongings, our collections of the old people, but also contemporary collections that sit in institutions, and how important it is for community to have access for that, but also how important it is for artists to have access to that and to be able to respond with new work. So Rising are partnering with Museums Victoria and Yirramboi as well, and we're presenting new work by about 8 new artists, or 8 artists, I should say. They're not new, but new work by those artists, yeah.
Fantastic. Such brilliant projects and such important work being showcased through Rising. Are you able to tell us a little bit more about the artists and some of the works that are being presented, maybe the messages that are being shared?
Sure. Well, with the art trams, we have Ani Zita Thompson, who's a Wurundjeri Yorta Yorta elder. We have Jara Carolina Steele, who's a Bunwurrung woman and Wamba Wamba woman based in Melbourne. Thomas Marks, who lives in Ballarat. Deanne Gilson, and Thomas is a Wotjobaluk Gunai Kurnai man. Deanne Gilson is a Wadawurrung woman from Ballarat also. We have Ani Rochelle Patton, who's a Yorta Yorta, Doodaroa and Wamba Wamba woman. And I think that's 6. I might have left someone off there. But, the reason that I am talking about their language groups is because that's a whole part of it. It's about that becoming a familiar thing when people engage with Aboriginal art. It's sort of also understanding where we come from, how we identify, and bringing that into the city on trams is really exciting. Each artist, tells a very unique story with their work. But together they're speaking of themes of connecting to country and waterways and different ecologies of Melbourne that go beyond the concrete that we are sitting in amongst right now, and also connections to family and non-human kin, like animals and plants and other things like that. And of course the idea of journeying. So that's been a really special project to work on with those artists. For moving objects, I'm working with Daniel Riley, and Daniel Riley is a dancer. Dan is teaching at VCA now, but danced for over a decade with Bangarra. And I've always been very interested in the way that dancers or people that use their body can engage with the collection. And Dan's doing a work on considering the body as the archive. And so we're working with a filmmaker, Kaz Eppa, and James Howard, who's a First Nations composer, to create a piece that will be projected at night on the Melbourne Museum, and will be sort of this meditation on the objects that are kind of inside the institution in the dark at night, and this kind of working around the Aboriginal body as the archive, and kind of speaking back into the institution in that way. So that's just one example of the works that are coming out of that project, but that'll all be launched on the 29th of March, so people can have a look at that then.
Thanks so much for sharing that.
And Jessie, I guess we'd like to ask you some similar questions about your work as well. You consult on strategy for activating public spaces and curate public art and programs. Can you maybe describe some of the projects you've worked on in this space?
Yeah, definitely. I've worked quite a bit for City of Melbourne over the years. I've come in as a contracted kind of curator of their public programs. I don't have any photos of that. There's photos up here of Pavilion because I did a lot of that. There's none of the City of Melbourne stuff, sorry. So for them, I've done a few music programs for Melbourne Music Week. And there was one year where Fashion Week actually had a music program, and so we put a stage out the front of the town hall, and there was a week of DJs that were also not DJs. They were just people who had great taste, and live bands out front, just on Swanston Street. So opportunities like that to bring things really into the street are quite amazing, and I feel so privileged that this city enables that to happen. The other stuff, obviously, Pavilion, we all know what that is. Amazing freedom to intersect lots of different disciplines. The time that I was there, the program was described as a laboratory in the park. and it was all about moving different people from different disciplines together. The strategy behind that was to get them to talk. Where I should also mention before I go on this tangent, Pavilion initially was an exhibition of architecture primarily. It was an annual commission by a world-renowned architect, and the program was to enable people to view that exhibition of architecture. So we had a lot of architects on the program, and a lot of architects tend to talk in industry speak. So we thought by having people next to one another that are not of the same industry, you'd end up having them talk to one another in a way that the public can understand and be accessible, but also end up kind of bringing together some connections that never would have happened otherwise. And throughout those programs, I know that there was a lot of introductions that ended up being long-lasting relationships and additional projects, totally external. But I think that kind of thing was really, really amazing to have the opportunity to kind of pair people together or pair organisations together and see what happened.
And what are some of the other questions that are sort of front of mind for you when you're commissioning works? How do you decide what's the most appropriate or desirable commission for a particular space?
Commissions, I don't do a huge amount of commissioning. Commissioning, I guess, when I think of it, it's more about kind of making new work, and the majority of the work that I do is to put together a program of events and a strategy for what might happen in them and how they happen. I have worked on a few commissions for sound pieces. One of them was Matthias Schack-Arnett from, at the time, he was at Speak Percussion, and that was about responding to the architecture of that moment, so about looking at what the space was going to be like. That particular commission was going to run every evening at sundown and be almost a surprise for people who might be walking past, and there was a matching light show. So I was thinking about what hasn't been done before, what would work in the context, also about kind of providing an opportunity to someone that might not have it otherwise. Another similar kind of commission we did was for a morning ritual, and it was a sound commission as well, and we had Nawi Carolyn Briggs come in and record, actually at Triple R Studios, thank you Triple R, a whole bunch of stories. She'd written some books on the stories, and they ended up, I think they were played for many more seasons than they were originally designed for, and they ended up being a really nice thing. That it would be of a morning, people would be coming in to get their coffee, or they'd be walking in the park, walking past, and it was just an invitation to come and sit down and hear about some stories of the place.
It's so beautiful to hear you describing the unexpected encounters, the connections between sort of disciplines that might not otherwise be in conversation all of the time, and hearing you describe an Pavilion lab in the park, I guess is really exemplary of this kind of discussion of the ways in which you're sort of bringing really important and interesting ideas into public forums where people can engage with them. And if we are talking about making the city a playground, then we absolutely have to talk about Playable Streets as well, because it's exactly the mission of what you're doing. You're both engaging and reconnecting communities through collaborative art in public spaces at home and online. Can you tell us a little bit more about the mission of Playable Streets?
It's kind of a funny one because Playable Streets started off as a project to make streets literally playable, as in turning benches into musical instruments and just things that people could touch around the streets. And we did our first project in 2015 through Test Sites, the amazing, public art program, and it was an abject failure and nothing worked. And from that, we decided that Playable Streets was going to be a kind of a motivational tool, the name of the company, to one day do that project and do it well. In the meantime, let's chat about Faces of Places. You want to chat about that?
Yeah, so there's a lot of different ideas that have, that I guess Playable Streets is almost, championing and offering. And so this one was something that we started working on together, which was a really exciting thing for me. I've known Glen for a long time, I think, through music and we bump into each other all the time. And so I thought that this would be something that would really sink in with what Playable Streets is doing. And we were really able to kind of blend together both our interests, I think, in it. So Faces and Places is a project that started about
March last year. Great time.
Yeah,
great time.
It was
mid-March.
There was a lot that we had to change sort of instantly for what we were doing. But basically, we wanted it to be, well, the intention was for it from Moulton Council, they put a call out for intergenerational projects. So basically artwork basis. And we decided, so we had a cohort from Coburg Primary School, and we had a pretty large, I think it was around 50 participants. With help from Moulton City Council, we sort of found a bunch of elderly and older participants from Moreland, from the entire suburb pretty much. We wanted we were looking in Coburg, but we opened up those circles, and there was 2 aged care facilities involved. There was Wintringham Lodge and Northern Gardens, and there was a lot of kind of private citizens and just folks that sort of heeded the call out from the Moreland website. So we ended up with a really great bunch of folks. The whole thing was that you don't have to call yourself an artist. You just have to sort of be interested in bringing a bit of energy to it, and really we wanted to make it as accessible as possible. So these exercises we came up with were very, very simple and very, very versatile, and accessible to as many people as possible.
Yeah, so it was essentially these drawing exercises, and these books became kind of like pen pal books for the older participants and the participants in primary school. And everyone was in lockdown, so we were like quarantining the books between dropping them off, like sneaking out at night and stuff like that. Shh, don't tell anyone. But and so we kept the project going, and the goal of the project was to create a large mural on the Coburg Library. That was Steph took all these designs from the participants and got a scissor lifter and painted it on this wall. And it's something that it was really interesting when Steph and I just started chatting in March when we were going to apply for this project. We'd been working with kids, essentially turning their art into public art of some kind. Steph had just done a toilet block in Coburg with the kids from Coburg Primary.
Yeah, been a bit of toilet mural action in the last couple of years, which is a cool niche I'm enjoying.
And I've been making some large-scale murals that were interactive in galleries and things like that, where kids could touch the paint of the paintings of the children and hear voices from the children, cut up narratives and things like that. So that was a work that I've been thinking of. And it's all this sort of basic thing of like giving other people agency, giving other people the tools for creative agency and putting their work in public space.
And boiling it down to a really non-intimidating kind of process. I think that was really important for me. I think if you say, if you show them the end result that this is going to be on a huge wall in the library, people are going to just really think way too much about some things. And for folks that aren't particularly, they don't identify themselves as artistic people, I think that can really get in the way. So, this pen pal project, a huge part of it was finding a way for the elder generation and the younger generation to also connect somehow with this added blockage of course, lockdown number 1 came into play, but we were able to kind of get around that with a lot of protocol. And then even further into it, lockdown, stage 4 lockdown 2 happened. So, it's never going to be the end of the world if you have to pause it, but I think it really became quite important at that stage for connection to continue to be able to be possible somehow. A lot of the older participants, for sure, I think, in pretty hard situations in those aged care facilities, and I think that this kind of pen pal idea and program really, gave connection, to both parties. The kids were also in really vastly different homeschooling setups, so. Yeah, I was really proud and amazed about how everyone pulled it together in the end, getting these artwork books back and forward, and yeah, there was a hell of a lot of wiping down and Glad bags and Glen 20. Yeah, it was a lot. So, yeah, we did it.
Excellent. What's been the community response to the mural?
Steph got a lot of direct community response whilst painting the mural, and it ran the gamut. It ran the gamut.
No, there was actually only one person who was. She was concerned that the wind was gonna. She was just thinking about logistics too much. I was like, that's my job. But yeah, we basically just had. I was up that scissor lift. I had to. That was probably the highest mural I've ever been involved in. I had to.
Not a fan of heights.
Yeah, not a huge fan. I was had to just suck it up and got up pretty high. But the response, it was one of my favourite experiences as a arts worker ever, I think, just being on this absolutely chaotic corner. That corner is so vibrant, so chaotic. There are people crossing the road in the most death-defying ways constantly. And when people sort of see that colour start creeping down the wall, like it's creeping down, like, sort of a clustering, people just started to interact so loudly and excitedly about it. And that was another part, I think, of the intergenerational, I think it was part of the collaboration, just how much I ended up talking for like 3 hours of our 10-hour days.
And how many shed commissions did you get proposed?
We got asked to paint 4 people's sheds in this mural and a fish and chip shop sign. So that was good. Totally.
That's so brilliant. Well, certainly this talk has been an incredible opportunity to sort of speak about reconsidering the place and purpose of art outside of galleries and museums. And as you're just describing so beautifully, the response and the connections that can happen through projects of this nature. We'd love to sort of speak about some of the other projects that you're working on. And Jessie, of course, you recently founded Other Matter Studio. We thought it would be really interesting to talk about this too, as it's another creative platform in which you're encouraging people to reflect on their environment and also making a space for people to explore. Could you describe a little bit about the educational and artistic aims of Other Matter?
Yeah, absolutely. A couple of years ago, I started kind of changing and I guess looking to do my own thing and be more involved directly in making things. I'd been a beekeeper for about 7 years and I was always interested in kind of the natural systems around us, but kind of looking more into seaweed and the growing network of bioplastic practitioners around the world. I started messing around with my own bioplastic recipes, and I currently use only algae-based ones. I think I've sunk so much time into the research and development of different recipes, and there's still so much to learn about how to control the materiality of the algae polymers that's something that I'm focusing on. So Other Matter is a design studio. And I founded it because so many people came to me wanting to work with bioplastic and to do things. And it's basically, I think it's the only one in the world. So I think it's the only studio that you can come to and say, I want to make this out of bioplastic. Can you do it for me? And so I do. I've been doing exhibition design for a few different organisations. The beauty of those is particularly there's one that's a travelling exhibition that I've just delivered some components to. They will be, I think, doing 10 different installs nationally and internationally over the next 3 years. So they'll give those things back to me at the end of a de-install, and I will recook that exact stuff they gave me back and pour it back into the moulds and make it brand new and give it back to them. So there's no new inputs. In the past, they might have used plastic components that they probably would have had to turf at the end of an exhibition and get new for the next install. But this way, it's a full circular system. And I also grow my own algae that I use for pigments. So I'm trying to, just show people what is possible with different materials. The things that I make are also compostable and recyclable in a home kitchen and a home compost. So a lot of the compostable plastics that you get are often only compostable in a commercial facility, and in our current systems, at least where I live, we don't have any delivery to those places. So making a material that you can actually put in your own garden or your own worm farm, and it will completely deteriorate and be beneficial to the soil or the water where it ends up. But before that, you can actually remake it yourself. So I've been making a lot of tableware to focus on this idea of bottom-up change coming from the home rather than the big commercial systems that, there's no way that you can compete with the price of petrochemical plastic. It is absolutely, it's cheap. The stuff I make is not as cheap. It takes time and the raw ingredients are more expensive, but you can remake it yourself. So I might sell a bowl, but you could take it home and you could make it into a cup, or you could make it into a sheet, or you could make it into whatever you want. You can keep reusing it. And so what I'm trying to do is, I guess, action what is possible and keep doing that research and keep actually opening up for commissions to get challenges that I have to solve so that I can further do that research.
This is your new studio, which is about to open.
Yeah, I have to absolutely shout out to Creative Spaces and the City of Melbourne have given me this space for the next 6 months. And so that is one good thing about COVID, is that we now have artists coming into the city in real estate that they could never, ever afford.
And Kimberley, I guess galleries and museums, have had a huge role to play in presenting art and ideas to the public. And thanks to you and others, they're kind of going through this, process of reinvention at the moment. We'd love to speak to you about your work as a curator. And speaking with Broadsheet last year, you mentioned, I'm just going to quote you here, but I'm also focused on anti-colonial curatorial methodology and First Nations representation in museums and galleries, which means critically looking at the way in which First Peoples objects and histories have been represented and the language used in museums, and creating platforms for change and agency within colonial institutions. I'm just wondering if you wouldn't mind sharing a little bit more about this as a curator. What changes are you making and what further changes are needed within museums and similar institutions?
Just that little question.
That's a very loaded question.
I think that the Moving Objects project actually that I'm doing at the moment is a good example of kind of shifting curatorial practice that is about research and collections and engagement within the institution, but then the artists are presenting work out of that, and there's an ongoing kind of life beyond just the institution. I think it's about community for me at the end of the day. A big part of what I love and why I stay at the museum is also about access for community and community coming in and having a say over the collection and the vision for that in exhibition development or conservation or, a number of things within the collection kind of space of an institution. So I suppose, it's the decolonial kind of conversation or decolonising conversation, has been happening for a very long time within museums and galleries, and I'm constantly changing, the way I think about that myself, and considering whether it's even possible to decolonise a colonial institution like Museums Victoria or the NGV or, all the other kind of massive state institutions. Is it about creating kind of non-colonial or anti-colonial spaces where we, bring in cluster hires of Indigenous curators, where we have community-led, curatorial programs, where we take the collections out and it's not about coming in. Like there's all different things that we could be doing. I think, it's about accountability. It's about, me as a curator and as an Aboriginal woman being within an institution and what my accountability is to the collection and to my workplace, but also to my community. And that's really important. You have a responsibility when you work in these places. And for me, it's the responsibility to try and enact change for the benefit of the collection and for the benefit of community.
Absolutely. And to continue this sort of line of inquiry, I suppose, with regards to the place and the role of the curator. We heard an excellent conversation that you had recently with Samira on the score on Triple R, actually, where you were talking about the curator as a conduit of stories and knowledge and the role of sort of representing both past generations and also the present. Can you tell us a little bit more about your philosophy in this sense of the curator's role?
Yeah, I suppose it's just from my personal experience of working within the museum, and I've done other shows outside of the museum in places like Gertrude Contemporary or Ace Open, which are kind of more contemporary art spaces. But I guess it's sort of that dialogue that has to happen between often the institution that holds the power in terms of the collections and the representation of story and the community that they come from. So, the curator is the conduit, or the curator is that in-between kind of person, is a really important role to create a safe space, for community in cultural institutions, which can be very hard when you don't even have a safe space in there. Not to say, it's different everywhere, but yeah, I suppose that, in talking about the curator, a big part of my curating and my practice is making sure community feel that they can come to me to then come into the museum, or I can hold that space for them in some way. Yeah.
And Kimberley, you wrote a powerful essay for Rising about the importance of art and why it's essential. Can you tell us more about why art is essential? And maybe we can extend this sort of question to everyone on the panel as well. What are your thoughts on the necessity of art? I'll start with you, Kimberley.
Yeah, well, I mean, art for me and culture, I often get asked, are you a museum curator or an art curator? And I'm like, well, I work within the context of culture, and it makes, encapsulates everything. And it's so much about identity and place and belonging. A lot of our art, but a lot of our art is also in terms of like First Peoples art, is challenging and talking back to, the oppression that we have had as First Peoples in this country and continue to have in many ways. The power of art and the power of community voice is so important. And I think also in just, connecting to each other. Benjamin Law kind of, he spoke about that a lot around, we should be supporting the arts because this is actually getting us through our mental health right now. Anyway, so I could go on and on, but art is essential to me because in the context of where I work, where I come from, my father was an artist. My family are cultural people, and that's always been a part of who I am. So it's essential just to my being, really, to be working in a space of art and culture.
How about you, Glen? What are your thoughts on the necessity of art?
Why art? Yeah, good question. I was working with a bunch of preps today, like 4 grade prep classes, doing some workshops at Polyglot. And they were doing these amazing drawings on the floor on this black paper with these vibrant pastels, and it was very active, very action. It was always like action, like a 60s, like whoa, in the warehouse kind of thing. They were just rolling all over it and running up and down with these pastels. And I think just what was ruminating when you were asking that question, for me it was kind of, my big question is about who makes it or who gets to make it, and when do you tick over if you are an artist and artists make art. So like, when do you become an artist? And that sort of very blurry line seems like there's no importance there. It's really about the intention and the freedom that it allows. And so, watching kids in the creative process and also watching professional artists in the creative process doesn't seem that different to me. So I think it should become embodied and part of our lives and it is part of our lives from a very young age. I don't know what I'm trying to say. Like, I feel like I need some sort of pithy nugget to finish this ramble with. But I think it's like, was it like The Situationists or something? They talked about, you know, how life should be art and art should be life and there should be no distinction in between. And yeah, I think that's really true. And like before, and like the project Steph and I have been working on, it was about giving agency and suggesting that, like, hey, if your drawing is up on a, you know, how big is the wall? Massive. 9 by 9. If you're on a 9 by 9, you're definitely an artist, right? So allowing other people to take that space and stepping back. And I think in that project, you know, we might have been like 30% artist, 70% facilitator, or, you know, encourager, or, you know, just a different person. But I find all those labels really annoying and hard to define. Sorry, no pithy nugget at the end. Steph,
No,
important art?
It was good.
Good?
I can follow. I'm looking for the nugget, but I'm following. I'm following on. I think that a really great, you know, encapsulation of that whole question and that whole thing was, I think, the response afterwards from just people around, how connected people feel when they see these really. How connected people feel with other people when they see art, and it makes them want to do it. And then there's this big kind of cycle of folks expressing themselves, and I think
it's kind of infectious, would you say? Yeah. Too soon?
Yeah, there you go. But it is pretty much like it catches on. It's a cycle, and like it helps people in so many different ways, in empowering ways. Also, it doesn't need to feel meaningful. You can, you know, I think it just kind of it helps other people and it helps yourself. So yeah, that response that we got at the end, actually just as the first bits of colour started coming into that wall, I think just from everyone was sort of enough to highlight all of those underlining meanings to me.
And Jessie, it feels like these are underlying themes that run throughout your entire work as well.
I have a slightly different take, actually. The distinction of art as all the arts as a thing that was separate to all the other things is fairly recent and also fairly Western. I as I said before, I've worked with a lot of multidisciplinary things, and I don't actually find it helpful to distinctly remove art from everything else and have it sit on its own. It seems in this country that it's more of a kind of excuse to give less money, you know, maybe we should call it sport or something like that. But you know, I do think about this a lot. I went back and studied history and philosophy of science recently, and doing a lot of kind of research about the kind of more modern scientific techniques. They are so involved. They're months long before you get to even a scan that you can then work on. But even then, you know, in the Renaissance, only artists were allowed to have cadavers to study. It was a kind of moral thing that the people studying anatomy just had to go on Galen, and his teachings were based on animal dissections. So I digress, but I think there's a lot of merit to kind of not thinking of things as particularly bound by boxes, and you know, particularly in this country, acknowledging the First Nations people here that you know were all, you know, incredibly creative and, you know, are artists, but are also scientists and are also thinkers and are also, you know, a lot of different things. And I don't think that I think it's helpful to think about where that distinction comes from when we call something art or arts.
Absolutely. So extremely, such an extremely powerful idea, and I feel, and Lauren and I really feel that all of the work that you're doing is really entirely directed towards sort of blurring and breaking those distinctions and encouraging all forms of kind of interdisciplinary collaboration and learning and sort of affecting positive change through creativity in all of its many forms and learning. So thank you so much for expressing that. I think we're running out of time slightly, but we may have time for one or two more quick questions. And I feel like we have touched upon it a little bit. All of you are really exploring very experimental modes and sort of breaking down sort of conventional methodologies. But perhaps if there are any other examples of works that you're seeing or that you're involved with that are kind of really also creating new forms or paradigms of engagement of public art that you wouldn't mind sharing. If anyone had any examples of works they're seeing that they thought would be relevant.
I could talk about one. There's a slide. I think it's like 2 after this, or maybe a couple. Actually, it's a few more all through these. We've been working a bit. This one. Okay, so this is the cursed work. This is called Reach Out Sounds, which gets people in public to touch each other to make music. So these pods here have speakers, and when 2 or more people connect, they can trigger a computer that makes sound, so they can play all different instruments and things like that. But the whole premise of the work was to get people to touch each other in public spaces, get them to look in each other's eyes, get to do all the things that are, we would now think is kind of really terrifying, since we've spent a whole year holding our breath walking past people. So the next slide is actually what Playable Streets was doing at the start of March. I think the next slide. Oh no, not that one. That's the plans. Next one after. Oh no, another one. Sorry. Oh yeah, there we go. So we took that premise and we started developing a project in aged care centres with participants living with dementia, and we wanted to design this device with them specifically that would allow for interpersonal touch music making in a aged care setting or in a home setting, to get people connecting with people with dementia who are either family members that feel trepidation or other staff or things like that, because that is a sort of identified need. And this photo, I think, was taken like at the start of March. So obviously the project hit the skids, but we are still developing it. We're working with a design company called Periscope to redesign this as a unit that can be delivered into homes and work with families to look at interpersonal touch and the way that, like that literal connection, it seems so silly to say, but that little connection, the interpersonal touch connections that we had with these participants had real physical, physical changes that were experienced. And not just myself saying that, but carers and other people, the OTs that were watching it. Participants using their shakes and things like that to create tremolo on some of the instruments, or participants with cerebral palsy who hadn't been able to sort of move at all, had no mobility, were able to connect with this because it's an interface that uses the skin as the triggering device. And I think, and talking about, again, this sort of like intersection of different fields, I'm starting to do a lot of research into interpersonal touch and the way that we can either encourage it or how comfortable people feel with it. And strangely, all the research in this is in the field of marketing and consumer habits. Like maybe we'll buy more if we get touched here, but not much if we touched here. So I'm really interested in the way that we can kind of use that kind of research to create personal connections and to connections for connection's sake, and empathy through touch. Yeah.
I actually wanted to ask all of our guests, if you had total access to the city for a month in this kind of dream-like scenario, what location would you choose for a public artwork, and what would it be if you could take over any area of the city? I didn't give you much notice, but Jessie, I'm going to throw this at you and all of you.
Do we get unlimited budget as well?
Totally unlimited budget, just dream big.
I mean, the sky would be fun to take over if you had the budget.
Epic. Love that.
How about you, Kimberley? Is there anything you've had your eye on that you'd just love to take over?
There's so many. Instantly I was like Parliament or Parliament steps. So, there's that angle. But I love the idea of the sky and kind of looking up, because we're always looking down, especially now with
never
phones,
have budget for the planes.
Yeah. Let's do that. Let's take over the sky. Yeah.
productive chat. That was good. I was thinking, just merging those two questions before, I think about what I've been inspired by and what would I take over. I think it would be, I've been really inspired. I spend a lot of time in playgrounds. I have a 4-year-old. And though really great playgrounds inspire me endlessly and inspire I think a lot of parents because, of so many reasons. But just like I love playgrounds. I actually don't know any playground designers or anything, but I went to a really fantastic one in Portland, Victoria recently, and it took over like hours and hours of the day. So it'd be really cool to turn, I don't know, like Flinders Street or Parliament or something just into this anarchic cubby playground or something, and just then unleash kids into it and disrupt all the flow of everything. Just come up with that then, so we could go for grants soon, actually.
I think definitely disrupting flow seems right. Like, because, there's all the, like, talk of, stopping traffic and putting grass and all that sort of stuff. Like, just do it. Just do the whole city just for, until it all dies or whatever. I don't know what the logistics are on that. Haven't looked into it, but this is a moonshot, right? So, I think taking over those sort of things and I think unexpected stuff. So, if you have things like that, things in the sky, all that sort of thing. So,
playground in the sky.
But playground in the sky. But just, I think disruption, and that's what art does, and that's what public art does, and it that's what buskers do. That's what, just like someone with crazy hair or like, expressing themselves in some other way. That's what, it just takes us out of those grey glass phone sucking moments, and they're great. That's what's going to keep you, aging well.
Well, I did want to ask that of all of you. What does make an effective public artwork? What are the sort of factors in its success, Jessie?
I think if you can get people across the line to actually get involved, that's the hardest thing. Yeah, and then people get in, and then you get more people, and then they enjoy themselves. But if it's too intimidating or too hard, or then it's not as successful.
Yeah, I suppose for me it's sort of like the context. There's like fun public art. There's engagement and connection with the public, with the work. But then there's kind of memorials, and there's been a lot of talk around particularly last year with why do we have all of these memorials and statues of these people that are violent settlers and have done terrible things to First Nations people in this country and other people. But how do we kind of counter that narrative, and what are maybe the more serious kind of public works that speak to memory and honouring, and for me, I'm interested in that space. I think we've got to have a balance of everything, but and that's why I think I'm excited about the trams, because there's this like visibility of Aboriginal culture and the living history and the speaking back to this idea of the past and everything that's been happening the last few years. Ray Thomas was the number 6 tram, actually. I knew I forgot someone. And Uncle Ray is an incredible artist who's, he's a prolific Victorian artist. But yeah, that's, to me, there's kind of the fun stuff, but then there's also the really important memory.
I think, like with public art, the stuff we do is very tactile, and I think we're always thinking about accessibility for everyone in those regards, because I think if you're working in the public space, then you don't get to choose who your audience is or your participants are, or the people that might want to engage with your work. So thinking about, you might not always get it right, but it should always start from a place where you are considering that, you're consulting, talking, and if hopefully you're making it with people that have access needs or, don't get to engage in these sort of public programs as much as they would like to. And then just also, yeah, I've been thinking about that, like when you say with monuments and statues and things, and the kind of the weird place and like status and reverence and things like that, you know, public art creates. And that's why, I mean, I think that's why the art trams are so fun and great, is because it's taking it and putting it on this moving object and hurtling it through the city, so much more dynamic than a dude on a horse. So I think that's like, you know, changing the way we experience it is a great thing as well.
Yeah, I agree with, accessibility was a really underlining point in, I think we had a fair few participants in the latest mural work where there was people sort of on the edge of dropping out a lot with the elderly participants and things like that. So, you know, just that kind of one-on-one work with people and relationships. Accessibility is a really important part for me. So, yeah. Yep.
Well, I think we are sadly out of time. That session has gone really fast, but I want to thank all of our guests for joining us today. Steph Hughes and Glen Moulton from Playable Streets, Kimberley Moulton from Rising Festival and Museums Victoria, and Jessie French from Situate and Other Matter and many other things. Thank you as well for joining us on kind of a bit of a miserable Melbourne evening. Thanks for coming out to Pavilion. And a big thanks to the Pavilion team for having us here for Surroundings as well. Have a beautiful night.